Every morning at exactly 7:32 a.m., Brooke Andrews would glance up at the sound of the bell above the door. And there he would be, the man in the perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair always slightly tousled as though he'd just stepped out of a convertible. The mysterious tipper who left $50 for a $4 coffee. "Good morning," she said brightly, already reaching for a large cup. The usual Kieran Owens smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a way that made Brooke's stomach flutter. "You know me too well, Brooke," she laughed. Hard to forget someone who orders the same thing every day for 6 months. Kieran leaned against the counter, watching as she expertly prepared his Americano with an extra shot, and just a hint of cinnamon, a special touch she'd added once on a whim that he'd loved so much it became part of his regular order. "How's your morning going?" he asked, his voice carrying that warm timbre that somehow made the question feel like more than just polite small talk. "Better now," she replied without thinking, then blushed. "I mean, it's been busy, which is good. The rush keeps me awake." Kieran's smile widened, and Brooke noticed how his eyes, a deep blue that reminded her of the ocean at dusk, seemed to focus entirely on her, as though she were the only person in the bustling café. "Well, I'm glad I could contribute to the better part of your day," he said, accepting the coffee she handed him. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending a small jolt through her that she tried desperately to ignore. Kieran paid with a $100 bill, as usual. "Keep the change," he said, as usual. And then he was gone, leaving Brooke to wonder, as usual, who exactly this generous, handsome stranger was. What Brooke didn't know was that Kieran Owens wasn't just any customer. The suit wasn't for show, it was Armani custom-made. The watch on his wrist was worth more than what she made in 6 months at Being There, Done That. Kieran Owens was the CEO of Owens Maritime International, a shipping empire he'd built from his father's struggling regional business into a global powerhouse worth billions. And for reasons Brooke couldn't begin to fathom, he chose to get his morning coffee from her small neighborhood café instead of having an assistant bring him whatever he wanted. Later that afternoon, Brooke was wiping down tables when her coworker, Tina, nudged her. "Your admirer was in fine form this morning," Tina teased. "I swear he only smiles like that for you." Brooke rolled her eyes. "He's just being nice, probably feels sorry for the overworked barista." "Overworked baristas don't typically get $50 tips," Tina pointed out. "And he doesn't leave those for anyone else." "You're reading too much into it," Brooke insisted, though her cheeks warmed at the thought. "He's probably some mid-level executive who's terrible with money." Tina snorted. "With that suit, those shoes." "Honey, that man has money to burn, and he's burning some of it on you." Brooke shook her head and continued wiping tables. She couldn't afford to daydream about handsome strangers, no matter how generous they were with their tips. She had bills to pay, a younger sister to help support through college, and dreams of her own dreams that had been deferred when their parents died 3 years ago, leaving Brooke to step up as the responsible one at just 22. Now at 25, she balanced her job at the café with evening classes in graphic design. Her life was busy, structured, and decidedly unglamorous. Men like Kieran with his perfect suits and perfect smile didn't factor into her practical reality. The next morning, Kieran didn't show up at his usual time. Brooke told herself she wasn't disappointed as she served other customers, but her eyes kept drifting to the door each time the bell jingled. By 8:15, she'd given up hope of seeing him. Maybe he'd found another coffee shop, one with better coffee or prettier baristas, or the bell rang, and there he was, looking slightly harried, his tie looser than usual. "I'm so sorry I'm late," he said, approaching the counter. "Emergency conference call with Tokyo." Brooke blinked in surprise. "You don't have to apologize, I mean, it's just coffee." "It's not just coffee," he said, his voice earnest. "It's routine, structure, the best part of my morning." Something about the way he said it made Brooke's heart skip a beat. She turned quickly to make his Americano, hoping he wouldn't notice the flush spreading across her cheeks. "Rough morning?" she asked, desperate to change the subject. Kieran sighed. One of our ships ran into some regulatory issues in Singapore, nothing catastrophic, but he stopped abruptly. Sorry, you don't need to hear about my work problems. I don't mind, Brooke said, handing him his coffee. It's nice to know you're human like the rest of us. His laugh was warm and genuine. Very human. Very fallible. He hesitated, then added, Listen, Brooke, I've been coming here for months and we've never really talked. Would you maybe want to, Brooke, need you on the second register? Her manager called out, the moment shattered. Kieran glanced at his watch and grimaced. I should get going anyway. But I'll see you tomorrow. It sounded almost like a question, as if he weren't sure she'd be there, as if she had any choice about where she spent her mornings. Same time, same place, she confirmed with a smile. He left his usual tip, but this time there was something tucked under the bill, a business card. Plain white with just his name and a phone number. No title, no company name, just Kieran Owens in elegant, understated font. Brooke slipped it into her pocket before anyone could notice, telling herself she'd probably never use it. That night, as she sat at her small desk working on a design project, the card seemed to burn a hole in her wallet. Finally, she pulled it out, turning it over in her fingers. On impulse, she did what any curious person with internet access would do. She typed his name into a search engine. The results made her coffee cup slip from her fingers, spilling lukewarm liquid across her keyboard. Kieran Owens, 32 years old, CEO of Owens Maritime International. Estimated net worth, $2.4 billion. There were photos of him at charity galas, at economic forums, standing on the deck of massive container ships. Kieran in tailored tuxedos, Kieran shaking hands with world leaders, Kieran looking every inch the business titan he apparently was. Brooke stared at her screen in disbelief. The man who came to her café, who chatted with her about the weather and asked about her day, who tipped her generously but otherwise treated her like a human being, that man was a billionaire. She closed her laptop, suddenly feeling foolish. Of course someone like him wouldn't be interested in someone like her. The tips, the friendly conversation, it was probably just his way of being kind to service workers. Maybe he'd had some formative experience with poverty that made him extra generous. Or maybe $50 was so inconsequential to him that he didn't even notice he was doing it. The next morning, Kieran arrived precisely on time, looking as impeccable as ever. Brooke tried to act normal, but knowing what she now knew made it difficult to meet his eyes. Everything all right? He asked as she handed him his Americano. You seem distracted. Fine, she said quickly, just didn't sleep well. I know that feeling, he said with a sympathetic smile. I was up until 2 reviewing contracts for a new port facility we're developing in Malaysia. Contracts. Port facility? Each casual reference to his actual life made Brooke feel increasingly out of place in whatever this was. Sounds important, she managed. It's tedious, mostly, he said with a shrug, but necessary. He hesitated, then asked, Did you happen to find my card yesterday? I realized after I left that I didn't explain. Yes, she said quickly. I did, thank you. I was hoping, he said, his usual confidence wavering slightly, that maybe you'd consider using it, to call me, I mean, or text, whichever you prefer. Brooke stared at him. Why? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Why? Yes, why would you want me to call you? Kieran's expression softened. Because I'd like to get to know you better. Outside of this café, maybe over dinner. Brooke felt a surge of something, anger, embarrassment, confusion rise within her. I know who you are, she blurted out. Kieran's eyebrows rose slightly. You do? I Googled you. She lowered her voice, aware of other customers nearby. You're Kieran Owens of Owens Maritime. You're a guy who likes coffee, he offered with a small smile. A billionaire, she hissed. Understanding dawned on his face. Ah, that. Yes, that, she said. Why didn't you tell me? Kieran glanced around, aware of the growing line behind him. Could we maybe discuss this when you're not working? That's why I gave you my number. Brooke felt flustered and out of her depth. I don't think that's a good idea. His face fell, but he nodded. I understand, I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. He pulled out his wallet, but instead of his usual 100, he placed exact change on the counter. Have a good day, Brooke. As he walked away, Brooke felt a strange sense of loss. For the first time in 6 months, he hadn't left her a tip not because he was being cheap, she realized, but because he thought she didn't want anything from him now that she knew who he was. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee orders and forced smiles. By the time she clocked out, Brooke had convinced herself she'd overreacted. So what if he was rich? He'd always been kind to her. He'd never talked down to her or treated her like she was beneath him. And now she'd probably offended him so deeply he'd never return to the café. That evening, as she sat on her couch with a frozen dinner, she found herself pulling out his card again. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed a message. I'm sorry about this morning. I was surprised and didn't handle it well. I'd like to talk if you're still interested. She hit send before she could change her mind, then stared at her phone, half expecting it to explode. Instead, 3 dots appeared almost immediately, followed by a reply. Nothing to apologize for. I should have been upfront. Are you free tomorrow evening? Brooke hesitated, then replied, Yes, after 6. I'll pick you up at 7 if that works. Just let me know where. Brooke gave him her address, then immediately panicked about the state of her apartment, her wardrobe, her life in general. What did one wear to dinner with a billionaire? What would they even talk about? The next day dragged by. Kieran didn't come to the café, which was both a relief and a disappointment. By the time Brooke got home and showered, she'd almost convinced herself to cancel. But something curiosity, attraction, or simple politeness made her continue getting ready. At exactly 7:00 p.m., there was a knock at her door. Brooke took a deep breath and opened it. Kieran stood there in dark jeans and a navy blazer, looking more casual than she'd ever seen him but still effortlessly elegant. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers. Hi, he said, his smile tentative. These are for you. Brooke accepted them, surprised by the simple, thoughtful gesture. She'd half expected roses or some exotic bloom that cost a fortune. Thank you, she said, stepping back to let him in. They're beautiful. I remembered you mentioned once that you liked wildflowers, he said. You were wearing a pin with a blue one, a cornflower, I think. Brooke was touched that he'd remembered such a small detail. That was months ago, he shrugged. I pay attention to things that matter. The simplicity of his statement disarmed her. Brooke found herself relaxing slightly as she put the flowers in water. So, she said, turning back to him, where are we going? Should I expect a helicopter to whisk us away to Paris or something? Kieran laughed. Would you like that? Because I could make some calls. Brooke's eyes widened. You're joking. About the calls, no. About whether I'd do that for our first proper conversation? Yes. His expression turned serious. Brooke, I know you're uncomfortable with the money thing. That's why I never brought it up. I'd like to take you somewhere nice but not ostentatious. There's a little Italian place a few blocks from here, family-owned, amazing pasta. Would that be okay? The consideration in his voice made something soften in Brooke's chest. That sounds perfect, actually. The restaurant was exactly as he described, cozy, authentic, with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. The owner greeted Kieran by name and led them to a quiet table in the corner. You come here often? Brooke asked after they'd ordered. When I can, Kieran said. My mother was Italian. She taught me to appreciate good pasta above all else. His smile turned wistful. She passed away 5 years ago. I'm sorry, Brooke said softly. I lost my parents 3 years ago, car accident. Kieran's eyes filled with genuine sympathy. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was, still is sometimes. She took a sip of water. I became my sister's guardian overnight. She was 17. I was 22 and barely had my own life figured out. Is that why you work at the café, to support her? Brooke nodded. She's at State now, studying nursing. Scholarships cover most of it, but there are still expenses, and I'm taking night classes in graphic design. That's impressive, Kieran said, and the admiration in his voice seemed completely genuine. Balancing all that couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. But you do what you have to do for family. She studied him curiously. What about you? How does someone become a shipping magnate before they're 35? Kieran laughed. Well, step one is to be born to the right parents. So you inherited it all. Brooke couldn't keep the slight note of disappointment from her voice. Not exactly, he said, leaning forward. My father started Owens Maritime when I was a kid. It was a small regional shipping company with 2 vessels. When I joined after business school, we had maybe 5 ships and were on the verge of bankruptcy. What happened? I saw an opportunity that everyone else missed, Kieran explained, his eyes lighting up with remembered excitement. The Panama Canal expansion was going to change shipping routes dramatically. We restructured, secured some risky financing, and positioned ourselves perfectly for when it opened. 8 years later, we have a fleet of 78 vessels and operations in 43 countries. The passion in his voice as he spoke about his business was captivating. This wasn't a man who'd coasted on inherited wealth, he was someone who'd taken risks, worked hard, and built something meaningful. That's actually really impressive, Brooke admitted. Thank you, he said. But enough about maritime logistics. Tell me about your design work. You mentioned once that you were working on a project you were excited about. Brooke was surprised he'd remembered that passing comment from weeks ago. She found herself telling him about her studies, her dreams of opening her own design studio someday, the projects she was working on. To her amazement, he asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. As dinner progressed, the initial awkwardness faded. They discovered shared tastes in books and music, laughed about similar childhood embarrassments, and debated the merits of various coffee brewing methods. Kieran was knowledgeable but never condescending, confident but not arrogant. By the time they finished dessert, a tiramisu they shared, Brooke had almost forgotten about the wealth disparity between them. Almost. Can I ask you something? She said as they walked slowly back toward her apartment. Anything. Why do you come to being there? There must be a dozen high-end coffee places closer to wherever you live or work. Kieran was quiet for a moment. The first time was coincidence. My usual driver was sick, and the replacement took a wrong turn. I was running late for a meeting and needed caffeine desperately. Your café was there, so I stopped in. He glanced at her. But I came back because of you. Because of me. Brooke felt her pulse quicken. You were having a terrible day. Someone had spilled coffee all over the counter, your manager was being unreasonable, and you looked completely overwhelmed. But when it was my turn to order, you smiled at me like I was the only customer who mattered. You asked how my day was going, and you actually waited for an answer. Brooke tried to remember that day but couldn't. I was having a pretty awful day myself, Kieran continued. Major contract falling through, board members questioning my decisions. But for those 2 minutes while you made my coffee, I felt seen, not as a CEO or a balance sheet, but as a person. So you kept coming back because I was nice to you? Brooke asked, trying to understand. I kept coming back because for those few minutes each day, I could just be Kieran having coffee, not Kieran Owens, CEO with the weight of thousands of employees on his shoulders. He stopped walking and turned to face her. And yes, because I thought you were beautiful and kind and I wanted to see you again, but I never knew how to bridge that gap without it being weird or inappropriate. Brooke felt warmth spread through her chest at his honesty. The $50 tips were your way of bridging the gap. Kieran laughed, looking slightly embarrassed. Partly appreciation for great service, partly my awkward way of showing I noticed you. I'm not great at this, he gestured between them. Dating, normal human interaction outside of boardrooms. My last relationship ended because she was more interested in my bank account than me. That's why you didn't tell me who you were, Brooke realized. I wanted you to know me, not my net worth. He hesitated. Does it bother you, the money? Brooke considered the question seriously. It's intimidating, she admitted. I live paycheck to paycheck. My apartment could fit in your closet, probably. I can't relate to your world. You might be surprised, he said softly. My world can be lonely. full of people who want things from me, who see me as a means to an end. What I can't relate to is someone who builds genuine connections the way you do with your customers, with your sister, with everyone around you. They'd reached her building. Brooke turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the streetlight caught the blue of his eyes. "I had a really nice time tonight," she said. "Me too," he replied. "Could we maybe do it again?" "I'd like that," Brooke said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Kieran leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Brooke rose slightly on her toes to meet him halfway. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a beginning rather than a demand. When they separated, Kieran smiled, that smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Tomorrow morning, usual time?" Brooke laughed. "I'll have your Americano waiting." True to his word, Kieran appeared at 7:32 a.m. the next day, and the day after. And the day after that. But now he sometimes lingered, chatting with her during quiet moments. Sometimes he'd bring her pastries from a bakery he'd discovered, or books he thought she might enjoy. Their second date was to an art exhibition featuring emerging graphic artists, something Kieran had researched specifically because of her interests. Their third was a cooking class where they laughed themselves silly trying to make proper pasta from scratch. Each time, Kieran chose activities that were thoughtful and personal rather than extravagant. He drove a luxury car, yes, but not an ostentatious one. He dressed well, but not flashily. The only time his wealth became obvious was when he absent-mindedly mentioned having to cut their evening short for a video call with his team in Dubai, or when his phone rang with calls from foreign ministers or industry titans. 2 months into their relationship, Brooke finally visited his home, a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was beautiful but surprisingly understated, with comfortable furniture and walls lined with books. "I expected something more." "I don't know, Fancy," she admitted as he gave her a tour. "Would you be more comfortable if I had gold-plated fixtures and priceless art?" he asked with amusement. "No," she said quickly. "This feels like you, thoughtful, elegant, not showing off." His smile warmed her from the inside. "High praise from the woman who's been forcing me to up my coffee knowledge. Did you know I now bore my executive team with lectures about bean origins and roasting techniques?" Brooke laughed, but something had been nagging at her. "Kieran, can I ask you something serious?" "Of course," he said, his expression sobering. "Where do you see this going? Us, I mean." She gestured between them. "I'm still a barista taking night classes. You run a global empire. At some point reality has to set in, right?" Kieran took her hands in his. "Reality already has set in, Brooke. The reality is that I'm happier with you than I've ever been. The reality is that I admire your intelligence, your work ethic, your kindness more each day. The reality is that I'm falling in love with you." Brooke's breath caught. "You are." "Completely," he confirmed, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "Does that scare you?" "Less than it should," she admitted. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." His smile was radiant. "Then that's all that matters. We'll figure out the rest as we go." And they did. Over the next year, their lives gradually intertwined. Kieran set up a scholarship fund for nursing students at Brooke's sister's school, ensuring she could complete her education without financial stress. He offered Brooke an opportunity to redesign Owens Maritime's visual branding as her first major professional project, insisting on paying her market rate despite her protests. Brooke eventually left the café to focus on her design business, which flourished partly through connections. Kieran helped her make always carefully, always respecting her desire to succeed on her own merits. They learned to navigate their different worlds. Brooke became comfortable at charity galas and business dinners, while Kieran discovered the joy of farmers' markets and street fairs. They argued sometimes about money, about time commitments, about the normal friction points in any relationship, but always found their way back to understanding. On their 1-year anniversary, Kieran took Brooke back to Been There, Done That. He'd arranged for the café to be closed to other customers for an hour, decorated with fairy lights and flowers. "This is where it all began," he said, leading her to a table where 2 cups of coffee waited. Where a very sleep-deprived CEO fell in love with the barista who made him the best Americano he'd ever tasted. Brooke laughed, touching the cup in front of her. "You're such a romantic." "Only for you," he said, his expression turning serious. "Brooke, this past year has shown me what really matters in life. Before you, I measured success in contracts signed and profits earned. Now I measure it in the moments we share, in the way your eyes light up when you talk about your work, in the future I can imagine with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Brooke's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee. "I don't care that we come from different worlds," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning but tasteful diamond ring. "I don't care what anyone thinks about the CEO and the barista. All I care about is building a life with you. Brooke Andrews, will you marry me?" Tears welled in Brooke's eyes as she nodded, too overwhelmed to speak immediately. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Yes." As Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, Brooke marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From casual customer to generous tipper to friend to lover to fiancé, Kieran had become the center of her world, not because of his wealth, but despite it. They celebrated with coffee instead of champagne, sitting in the café where they'd first met, planning their future together. Kieran talked about the charitable foundation he wanted them to establish together, focusing on educational opportunities for young people who'd lost parents. Brooke shared her vision for expanding her design business to help nonprofits with their branding. "You know what's funny?" Brooke said as they walked hand in hand from the café. "If you hadn't been such a ridiculously excessive tipper, I might never have noticed you." Kieran laughed. "Best investment I ever made." "Really? Better than that Panama Canal thing that made you billions?" "Infinitely better," he said, pulling her close. "That made me wealthy. You made me rich in all the ways that actually matter." 6 months later, they married in a ceremony that balanced elegance with intimacy. Just close friends and family gathered at a beautiful vineyard. Brooke's sister was her maid of honor. Kieran's best friend from business school stood as his best man. As they exchanged vows, Brooke thought about the unlikely path that had led them here, how a billionaire seeking a moment of normalcy had found love with a barista seeking stability. How they'd bridged their different worlds through respect, communication, and genuine care for each other. "I promise to never take you or your love for granted," Kieran vowed. "To build a life of purpose and meaning together. To remember that the most valuable thing I possess is not in any bank account or business portfolio, it's the trust you've placed in me with your heart." Brooke squeezed his hands, her own vows rising from her heart. "I promise to see you not your success, not your status, but you, to create a home where you can always be yourself. To remind you every day that you are loved for who you are, not what you own." 2 years later, they welcomed their first child, a daughter who had Kieran's blue eyes and Brooke's determined spirit. They balanced parenthood with their respective careers, building a life that honored both their ambitions. Kieran continued to lead Owens Maritime with vision and integrity, while making time for family his priority. Brooke's design studio thrived, specializing in branding for socially conscious businesses and nonprofits. Together, they established the Andrews-Owens Foundation, providing support to young adults who'd lost parents and needed educational or entrepreneurial opportunities. The foundation became their shared passion, a way to transform their own losses into hope for others. On Sunday mornings, they still made coffee together at home, Kieran insisting that Brooke's Americano remained unmatched by any 5-star hotel or restaurant in the world. Sometimes, they'd reminisce about those early days at Been There, Done That, marveling at how a simple coffee order had changed both their lives forever. "Do you ever regret it?" Brooke asked him once as they watched their daughter playing in the garden of their home. "Marrying someone who wasn't from your world," Kieran looked at her with the same warmth and focus that had first caught her attention years ago. "What you never understood," he said, pulling her close, is that I was never looking for someone from my world. I was looking for someone to create a new world with, he kissed her softly. And we did exactly that. As the years passed, their partnership only deepened. They faced challenges together, health scares, business setbacks, the normal stresses of family life, but always as a team. Always with the understanding that what they'd found together was worth protecting at all costs. And sometimes, when Kieran was away on business, he'd still leave ridiculously generous tips for baristas in cafes around the world, a habit he never outgrew. A small tribute to the coffee shop encounter that had given him everything he never knew he needed.